And in today's video, we're going to take a look at Native Instruments' new Maschine Expansion pack entitled Trill Rays. Trill Rays consists of sounds for pop, hip-hop, trap, and R&B, so if you're in the market for sounds in those genres, definitely check this one out. With that said, I didn't want to just go over the sounds and loops and make a beat. Instead, we're going to go over some tips, tricks, and techniques that you guys can use to make these loops your own. So let's jump into Maschine and check out this expansion pack. So I didn't exaggerate when I said this pack has a lot of loops. There's 452 loops to be exact. Alright, cool. So let's narrow our browsing filter a little bit and find ourselves a piano loop. One thing worth mentioning is that when you're auditioning loops inside of the Maschine browser, is that it will play in the tempo of your project. So just keep that in mind. In this first level of making loops your own, you'll be working with the audio engine as well as the sampler engine. The first thing you'll probably want to do is adjust the pitch, or in Maschine's case, the tune. Now the reason I like to start with the audio engine is because it auto stretches the sample tempo to the project tempo. The audio engine has 3 different modes: repitch, stretch, and formant. For added character, I like to use formant mode. In both the audio engine and in the sampler, you can reverse your sample. If you want to do it in the audio engine, you just go to the sampler editor, and in the bottom, you can hit reverse. Personally, I like to reverse samples in the sampler engine. So let's export this audio, bring it to another pad, and do just that. Now that we've exported the loop, it's going to be in this new pitch as well as the new tempo. So while inside the sampler, there's also some effects that you can use. So let's just turn up the drive, we'll play with the bit rate as well as the sample rate. And to get rid of some of that digital crunch, we can add a low pass filter. Now a very popular trend right now is pitch modulation and giving samples that extra, let's call it vinyl wobble. So let's have that be the last thing we do to this sample. So you can achieve this effect either through the modulation page or the LFO page. And it doesn't need a lot, so we'll just turn up the pitch knob to about 1%. Alright, cool. So that's level 1, and we've come such a long way from only just using the audio engine and the sampler engine. Alright, so in level 2 of making loops your own, we're going to start using audio effects to change the sonic characteristics of the original sound source. So let's bring up some strings for this example. So for the sake of this video, I'm only going to use Maschine stock plugins. And the first thing I want to do is get rid of some of these highs. So I'll just open up an instance of Maschine's filter. Next, let's give it some space and we'll open up an instance of Metaverb. And to give this loop some movement, let's add Maschine's phaser. Alright, so it still sounds a lot like that original source, so let's play around with Maschine's FM engine. Alright, cool. So let's dirty it up even more and throw on Maschine's Lo-Fi Effects plugin. The effects chain is getting pretty long, so the last thing we'll add is Maschine's frequency shifter to make the sample totally unrecognizable. Alright guys, so those are the first two levels of making loops your own. Level number 1 is where you're using the audio engine and the sampler engine. Level number 2 is where you're starting to use audio effects to change the sonic characteristics of the loops. Before we move on to the remainder of these tips and tricks, I'm going to ask you guys to hit that thumbs up button if you haven't already. And with that said, let's jump back into Maschine. In level 3, you're going to chop up the loop so that you can replay it and make it your own. So let's find a vocal sample to do just that. So inside a Maschine, the easiest way to chop up a loop is to use the sampler engine. You can use one of 3 slicing modes. So in this case, we're going to use a split mode and chop up our sample into 16 equal parts. Alright, cool. So it's already sounding different than the original loop. Let's take it a step further, let's add some movement and a pulsating effect, and we'll achieve that through sidechain compression. So on pad number 2, let's add a hi-hat to trigger that sidechain. Step number 2 in this process would be to add Maschine stock compressor, followed by selecting the input source, so in this case, our hi-hat on pad number 2. I want the sidechain to be triggered every 8th note, so on the hi-hat, I'm going to draw in MIDI notes on every 8th note. So here's the loop without the sidechain, and here's a loop with it. Alright, cool. So you may want to keep the hi-hat in, but for this scenario, I want to remove it and not hear it. So we'll go into the channel output, and instead of it getting sent to the group, we're going to select none. And now we'll still hear the pulsating effect without the hi-hat. Alright, cool. So that was a little side lesson on how to use sidechain compression as an effect instead of a mixing tool. Now let's take a look at some drum loops to see if it can inspire some additional melodies and counter melodies. Alright, so we have 3 drum loops that I want to take different parts from. The first drum loop, I really like the hi-hat pattern, so we'll throw on a high-pass filter to remove the kick and some of the snare. For the next loop, let's throw on a low-pass filter. For this last loop, I only want the percussive hits. So we'll change the audio unit to gate mode and we'll draw in some MIDI notes on the sections that we want to trigger. Alright, cool. So that's just one of many ways that you can blend drum loops to make some new and interesting patterns. Now, let's just hear what that sounds like with our vocal chops. In level 3, you'll probably want to add some additional sounds to your loop. Native Instruments Maschine Expansion packs tend to come with some massive presets. This one has a few of them, so let's just open that up and see if we can use some of those sounds to add to this loop. So all we're doing here, guys, is just adding and layering sounds to that original loop to, again, just make it our own. At this point, we're pretty much building a song around that first loop. So let's add one more massive preset to create a counter melody. Alright, so it's probably overkill at this point, but I really want to hammer in the fact that sometimes it's easier to remove sounds than it is to add sounds. So let's add another instance of this vocal chop and let's pitch it up and see what we can come up with. Alright, cool. So in level 1 and level 2, we also created some sounds. So I'll just add those sounds to this new loop and we'll come back and hear what that sounds like. Let's mute the drums and hear what our loop sounds like in level 3. Alright guys, so that's 3 levels of making loops your own. Whether you're working level 1, 2, or level 3, you can confidently say that you've added your own touch and your own flavor to these loops and to these expansion packs. With that said, let's take it up one final level and let's do my favorite thing, which is to resample and to reflip a sample or a loop that you've made yourself.